Behind closed doors in Virginia, a music legend lived his final years in complete privacy. Grammy Awards, platinum albums, millions earned. But how did D'Angelo actually spend his fortune? We're pulling back the curtain on the luxurious and surprising prestigious kingdom he built. The fortune in the groove. When the music world learned on October 14, 2025, that D'Angelo had passed away at the age of 51 following a private battle with pancreatic cancer, the conversation inevitably turned to the question of wealth and success. Here was a man who had fundamentally transformed R&B music, who had won Grammy Awards, who had influenced an entire generation of artists from The Weeknd to Frank Ocean to Anderson .Paak. Surely one might assume such a legendary figure must have accumulated tremendous wealth over his 3-decade career. But the reality of D'Angelo's financial life, born Michael Eugene Archer on February 11, 1974, tells a story that is both surprising and revealing about the music industry, about artistic priorities, and about what it truly means to be rich. At the time of his death, D'Angelo's net worth was estimated at approximately $1 million, a figure that seems almost impossibly modest for someone of his stature and influence in the music world. This modest figure for a Grammy-winning musician reflected a career marked by artistic brilliance, but also long hiatuses, limited output of only 3 studio albums over 30 years, personal struggles with addiction and mental health, legal issues, and a deliberate avoidance of mainstream commercial pursuits like endorsements or frequent touring. But to understand how we arrived at this number, we need to trace the money from its source, from the music that made D'Angelo a legend in the first place. Let's start at the beginning with the album that changed everything, Brown Sugar. Released in 1995, when D'Angelo was just 21 years old, this debut album would prove to be not just an artistic triumph, but also a significant commercial success. Brown Sugar debuted at number 6 on Billboard Top R&B Albums and went on to sell over 2 million copies globally, achieving platinum status in the United States and gold certification in Canada. The album's performance was nothing short of remarkable. It spent an incredible 65 weeks on the Billboard 200, with 300,000 copies sold in just the first 2 months. The singles from Brown Sugar became instant classics, songs like Lady and the title track. Brown Sugar dominated radio airwaves and became staples of the neo-soul movement that D'Angelo was helping to pioneer. But what did this success actually mean in terms of dollars and cents? At typical artist royalty rates of 50 cents to $1 per unit sold after label cuts and recording costs, Brown Sugar alone could have netted D'Angelo between $1, $2 million in lifetime royalties, plus the ongoing streaming residuals that would continue to accumulate years and even decades after the album's initial release. But Brown Sugar was just the beginning of D'Angelo's earning potential during this era. Before his debut album even dropped, the young artist was already making moves in the industry. He co-produced You Will Know in 1994 for Black Men United, a track that peaked at number 5 on the R&B charts, establishing him as not just a performer, but also as a producer and collaborator worth watching. This early work began building his publishing credits and generating fees that would supplement his album income. Following the success of Brown Sugar, D'Angelo embarked on major touring runs in the mid-1990s, performing across the United States and building a reputation as a magnetic live performer. Artists of his caliber during the 1990s and early 2000s could earn between $50,000 and $200,000 per show on major tours, though these figures represented the artist's cut after promoter and venue fees were deducted. While specific gross figures for D'Angelo's tours aren't publicly available, industry estimates suggest that his touring during this peak period could have generated significant income, potentially in the low millions over the course of his career. Then came 2000, and with it Voodoo, the album that would cement D'Angelo's status as one of the most important artists of his generation. The commercial performance of Voodoo was even more impressive than its predecessor. The album debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200, with a staggering 320,000 copies sold in its first week alone. Total sales for Voodoo eventually reached between 1.5 and 2 million copies, and the album spent 33 weeks on the charts, demonstrating remarkable staying power and continued interest from music fans. The album's lead single, Untitled, How Does It Feel, became a cultural phenomenon, and the accompanying video, which we'll discuss more later, turned D'Angelo into a household name and sex symbol. The Grammy wins that followed Voodoo's release further boosted the album's longevity and sales potential, ensuring that royalty checks would continue flowing for years to come. Similar to Brown Sugar, Voodoo likely generated comparable royalty income for D'Angelo, with the added benefit of increased publishing income from samples and covers of the album's tracks. Following Voodoo's release, D'Angelo toured extensively in the early 2000s with his backing band, the Soultronics, which included legendary collaborators like Questlove from The Roots. These tours took him to venues across the United States and Europe, with each performance adding to his growing financial portfolio. However, the exhaustion from this relentless touring schedule, combined with the pressure of maintaining his newly minted sex symbol status, would eventually contribute to his retreat from public life. A retreat that would significantly impact his earning potential for years to come. But before that retreat, D'Angelo continued to diversify his income streams through collaborations and features. He worked with some of the biggest names in music, including Erykah Badu, Lauryn Hill, Common, Snoop Dogg, and the legendary producer Jay Dilla. He contributed to soundtracks, including a Prince cover for Scream 2, and each of these projects added publishing credits and performance fees to his income. These collaborations, combined with his licensing and publishing work, likely generated between $100,000 and $500,000 total over the course of his career. Then came the long silence. From 2000 to 2014, a span of 14 years, D'Angelo released no new studio albums. This hiatus, which we'll explore in more detail later, had a profound impact on his earning potential. While his existing catalog continued to generate royalties through radio play, streaming, and licensing deals, the lack of new material meant no new major revenue streams, no album release tours, no Grammy campaign pushes that might have reminded audiences of his genius and driven renewed interest in his back catalog. When D'Angelo finally returned in 2014 with Black Messiah, the music landscape had changed dramatically. The streaming era was in full swing, and physical album sales, once the primary driver of artist income, were rapidly declining. Black Messiah debuted at number 5 on the Billboard 200 with approximately 100,000 to 150,000 first-week sales, respectable numbers but nowhere near the blockbuster figures of Voodoo's debut. The album reached number 1 on both the US indie and R&B/hip-hop charts and won Grammy Awards for Best R&B Album and Best R&B Song for Really Love. Despite the lower sales volume, estimated at around 500,000 plus total copies, the album's politically charged content ensured lasting royalties and continued relevance. D'Angelo also released a 2008 compilation, The Best So Far, with unreleased tracks, which added minor residuals to his income. Following Black Messiah's release, D'Angelo embarked on a 2014 to 2015 tour with his 10-piece band, The Vanguard, though these performances were more selective than his earlier touring days. He continued to make occasional high-profile appearances, a 2016 Prince tribute performance on The Tonight Show, a 2021 Versus battle at the Apollo, a 2022 Tribeca Festival performance, and even contributed original music to the video game Red Dead Redemption 2 in 2018, diversifying his income sources in ways that reflected the changing entertainment landscape. In 2024, D'Angelo made a guest appearance on James Samuel's track, and as late as that year, he was working on an unreleased album with Raphael Saadiq, showing that even in his final year of life, music remained central to his existence and his livelihood. So what was the final financial picture? D'Angelo's total catalog sales exceeded 2.3 million units globally, with over 2 million sold in the United States alone, and approximately 200,000 in the UK. At typical royalty rates of $1.13 per unit sold after label cuts and recording costs, his lifetime album earnings could conservatively be estimated at several $million. Add to this the touring income, the collaborations, the publishing rights, the licensing deals, and the streaming residuals, and while exact lifetime earnings are not publicly documented, as is common for private artists like D'Angelo who avoided the spotlight, his gross career earnings could conservatively be estimated at $10 million. But here's where the story takes a turn that reveals much about both the music industry and D'Angelo's personal journey. Despite potentially earning millions over his career, his estate at death was valued at just $1 million, with one breakdown estimating music royalties and publishing at around $400,000, touring and appearances at $250,000, licensing and collaborations at $150,000, and the remainder in personal holdings such as a small car collection or real estate equity. His 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, were expected to inherit the estate equally after fees, potentially receiving around $333,000 each, with no federal estate tax due to the estate's value being below the $13.6 million exemption threshold. The King's Luxury Kingdom. When we think of legendary musicians at the peak of their fame and influence, we often imagine mansions sprawling across multiple acres, garages filled with exotic cars, private studios equipped with millions of dollars worth of equipment, and a lifestyle dripping with the kind of luxury that only enormous wealth can buy. We picture the MTV Cribs version of success, the indoor basketball courts, the recording studios with gold records lining the walls, the infinity pools overlooking breathtaking vistas. But D'Angelo's living situation throughout his life and career painted a remarkably different picture, one that challenges our assumptions about how music legends actually live when the cameras aren't rolling and the public isn't watching. Let's start with the most surprising revelation. D'Angelo never owned or flaunted high-profile luxury real estate. Unlike many celebrities of his stature, there are no reports of mansions, vacation homes, or extravagant renovations throughout his entire career. This wasn't because D'Angelo was hiding his wealth or trying to maintain some facade of humility while living large behind closed doors. Multiple sources consistently emphasized his preference for quiet living, choosing privacy and peace over flashy celebrity mansions, with a focus on comfort rather than opulence. The primary residence that D'Angelo called home for much of his life was in or near his birthplace of Richmond, Virginia. He spent much of his life in or near his hometown, where he was born and raised in a Pentecostal household as the son of a preacher. This wasn't just where he grew up, it was where he repeatedly returned, especially during periods of personal struggle and creative introspection. He often returned to Richmond for seclusion, particularly after tours and during periods of personal struggle. The connection between D'Angelo and his Virginia home goes even deeper when we consider his creative process. He wrote and recorded significant portions of his debut album Brown Sugar at his mother's house in South Richmond, using a modest setup that consisted of little more than that 4-track recorder he'd purchased with his Apollo Theatre winnings. Think about that for a moment, one of the most influential R&B albums of the 1990s, an album that would go on to sell over 2 million copies and establish an entirely new sound in contemporary music, was created not in some state-of-the-art recording facility, but in his mother's house with equipment that a teenager could afford. Reports suggest D'Angelo owned or maintained a private residence in the Richmond or Powhatan County area, though intriguingly, this was never publicly verified through property records. The very fact that his property ownership remained unverified speaks volumes about how successfully D'Angelo maintained his privacy and how little he cared about publicizing his real estate holdings. There were no magazine spreads showcasing his home, no architectural digest features, no celebrity home tours. His Virginia home served as a sanctuary during his decade-long hiatus in the 2000s, where he focused on music creation amid battles with substance abuse, weight issues, and self-image conflicts. This Virginia sanctuary was where D'Angelo could be himself, away from the expectations and pressures of the music industry. He avoided public events and interviews, often staying indoors due to discomfort with fame and his status as a sex symbol, which clashed with his natural build and personal demons. The home wasn't a showpiece, it was a refuge, a place where a deeply private man could retreat from a world that wanted to turn him into something he never aspired to be. Toward the end of his life, some accounts indicate D'Angelo may have had a home in New York, where he reportedly passed away after months in the hospital and a brief period in hospice care. But even here, no specifics on the property's size, value, or amenities are available, and the residence aligned with his lifelong pattern of low-profile living rather than urban luxury. If D'Angelo did maintain a residence in New York, it was likely chosen for practical reasons, proximity to recording studios, medical facilities, or family, rather than as a statement of wealth or status. Now let's talk about the vehicles, or rather, the notable absence of information about luxury vehicles. In an era where rappers and R&B stars regularly flaunted their car collections on social media and in music videos, where having a Bentley or a Lamborghini was almost considered a prerequisite for success in the music industry, D'Angelo's relationship with automobiles remained largely unknown and unremarkable. Details on D'Angelo's cars are sparse and tied more to incidents than luxury. The most concrete information we have about D'Angelo and vehicles comes from tragedy rather than triumph. In 2005, D'Angelo was involved in a near-fatal car crash while driving under the influence, which led to arrests for DUI, marijuana, and cocaine possession. This incident wasn't about showing off an expensive car. It was a rock-bottom moment in his struggle with substance abuse. One vague report mentions a select collection of cars as part of his assets, but no models, values, or evidence of high-end vehicles like sports cars or luxury brands are specified. The absence of information is itself informative. D'Angelo's lifestyle did not emphasize flashy transportation. Instead, he traveled primarily for tours with his bands the Soultronics and later the Vanguard, or for studio sessions, often retreating to Virginia afterward. He wasn't the type of artist who would be photographed pulling up to the Grammy Awards in a custom Rolls-Royce or posting Instagram photos of his latest automotive acquisition. When it came to his daily lifestyle and living conditions, the picture becomes even more clear. D'Angelo was described as very eccentric and a recluse who didn't like going out of the house, with his daily life revolving around music, family, and introspection, rather than socialite excesses. This wasn't the lifestyle of someone attending exclusive parties, dining at Michelin-starred restaurants, or maintaining memberships at elite country clubs. His creative process, while obsessive and meticulous, didn't require or involve the kind of lavish spending that we might imagine. He was known for obsessive studio work, dictating rhythms, perfecting arrangements, and drawing from influences like Sly and the Family Stone. But critically, this occurred in standard recording spaces like Electric Lady Studios in New York, not in custom-built home setups. Think about what this means. Here was an artist with the resources to build the home studio of his dreams, to install any piece of equipment he desired, to create a private sanctuary where he could work on music 24/7 without ever having to leave his house or pay hourly studio rates. Many artists with far less success and far smaller bank accounts than D'Angelo have invested hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars into home recording setups. But D'Angelo never did this. He continued to work in commercial studios, to collaborate with others in shared spaces, to maintain that connection to the broader musical community even as he retreated from the public eye. D'Angelo's low-key, humble way of living included balancing fatherhood. He had 3 children, including a son with ex-partner Angie Stone, with his creative pursuits, without any documented indulgences in fine dining, travel, or designer goods. There are no stories of D'Angelo dropping tens of thousands of dollars at exclusive clubs. No reports of extravagant shopping sprees. No reports of extravagant shopping sprees. No paparazzi photos of him boarding private jets or vacationing at exclusive resorts. What made his living situation even more notable was what it said about his priorities. Much of D'Angelo's life was overshadowed by personal challenges, including alcoholism, drug abuse, detailed in the 2019 documentary Devil's Pie, weight fluctuations, and guilt over his chosen one status in music. These issues led to rehab stints, cancelled shows in 2018 due to medical conditions, and the 2025 Roots picnic due to surgery delays, and extended periods of isolation. In his final years, D'Angelo focused on an unreleased album while living privately, with no accounts of luxurious amenities or staff. Even as he battled the cancer that would ultimately take his life, even as he spent months hospitalized before entering hospice care, supported by family including his son Michael Jr., there were no reports of private medical suites or concierge healthcare that unlimited wealth might have provided. The cumulative picture of D'Angelo's living conditions throughout his life is one of intentional modesty. His living conditions were characterized by modesty, privacy in Virginia and possibly New York, and a dedication to artistry amid profound personal battles. This wasn't poverty or hardship. D'Angelo had the means to live more lavishly if he had chosen to do so, but he consistently chose otherwise. The eternal groove. When we measure a life, especially the life of an artist, what metrics do we use? Do we count the zeros in their bank account? Do we tally up their real estate holdings and luxury possessions? Or do we measure something more intangible, more enduring, the impact they had on their art form, the influence they wielded over subsequent generations, the way their work continues to resonate long after they're gone? In the case of D'Angelo, the answer becomes clear when we look at the legacy he left behind, a legacy that makes the question of his material wealth seem almost trivially beside the point. There's a concept in music criticism and appreciation that transcends technical analysis, that goes beyond counting notes or analyzing chord progressions. It's the ineffable quality that certain artists possess, the it factor that can't be taught or bought, the presence that makes everything they touch transform into something special. D'Angelo had this quality in abundance, and understanding his legacy requires us to first understand this fundamental truth about who he was as an artist. This comparison illuminates something crucial about D'Angelo's legacy. Like Bob Marley, D'Angelo possessed that undefinable quality that made him irreplaceable, that made his version of a song the definitive version, that made his presence on stage something transcendent. You couldn't replicate it by analyzing his technique or copying his style. He was that guy, and you just weren't. Let's talk about the music itself and what it meant. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand about D'Angelo's legacy. The quantity was never the point. In sports, we have this tendency to look at people who have performed and reached great heights, but do not necessarily do so consistently, and we think about them in terms of what wasn't or what was left on the table. This is the lens through which we must view D'Angelo's legacy. Brown Sugar, Voodoo, and Black Messiah. These 3 albums influenced countless contemporary artists, including The Weeknd, Frank Ocean, and Anderson .Paak, helping to shape and define the sound of modern R&B and neo-soul in ways that continue to reverberate through music today. These weren't just successful albums, they were paradigm-shifting works that fundamentally altered what R&B could be, what it could sound like, what it could express. D'Angelo didn't emerge from nowhere. He was part of a continuum, a carrier of traditions that stretched back through decades of Black American music. Understanding D'Angelo's place in this lineage helps us understand why his legacy is so significant. He wasn't just making music, he was carrying forward a tradition, reclaiming a heritage, holding a torch that had been passed to him by the giants who came before. This ability to hear the connections, to understand how the past informed the present and would shape the future, was central to D'Angelo's artistry and his legacy. But D'Angelo's influence wasn't just about musical lineage or technical innovation. There was something deeply personal and human about the connection he forged with his audience. This is what made D'Angelo's music transcendent. It wasn't just intellectually interesting or technically impressive. It moved people. It made them feel something profound, something spiritual, something that connected to the deepest parts of their humanity. There was an authenticity to D'Angelo's approach that resonated with audiences in a way that felt increasingly rare in a commercialized music industry. This is the essence of D'Angelo's legacy, not complexity for its own sake, not technical showboating, but music that connected directly to the soul, delivered by an artist who remained fundamentally himself throughout his career. The cool that defined his music wasn't affected or manufactured, it was intrinsic to who he was. This perspective cuts to the heart of what makes D'Angelo's legacy so powerful and enduring. Unlike material wealth, which can be spent, divided, or lost, unlike property, which can decay or be destroyed, unlike fame, which inevitably fades, the music remains. It exists in a realm beyond economics, beyond mortality, beyond the vicissitudes of fortune and circumstance. This is the ultimate measure of an artist's legacy, and by this measure, D'Angelo's legacy is immeasurable. He didn't just entertain people, he moved them. He didn't just create products, he created art that touched souls. Love. This is the currency that matters when we're talking about legacy. Not dollars, not possessions, not fame for its own sake, but love. The love that audiences felt for D'Angelo's music, the love that fellow musicians expressed for his artistry, the love that continues to grow as new generations discover his work and recognize its profound influence on the music they love. D'Angelo held the torch. Through his 3 albums, through his performances, through his uncompromising commitment to artistic integrity, he kept alive a tradition that stretched back through Prince, through Curtis Mayfield, through James Brown and George Clinton, through all the giants of Black American music. And in doing so, he passed that torch forward to artists like The Weeknd, Frank Ocean, Anderson .Paak, and countless others who continue to draw inspiration from his work. In summary, D'Angelo's life before death prioritized artistic integrity over material excess, with reclusiveness in Virginia as a constant theme. This wasn't a failure or a missed opportunity, it was a choice, a conscious decision about what mattered and what didn't. His luxury, if we can call it that, was arguably in his musical legacy, not tangible wealth or opulence. D'Angelo may have died with an estate worth $1 million, but he left behind something infinitely more valuable. A body of work that will continue to inspire, move, and influence people for generations to come. He left behind a redefinition of what R&B could be, a blueprint for artistic integrity in an industry that often demands compromise, and a reminder that the richest life is not necessarily the one with the most zeros in the bank account. In our modern age, where success is so often measured in Instagram followers and streaming numbers, in luxury brands and conspicuous consumption, D'Angelo's life and legacy offer a powerful counterpoint. Here was a man who achieved the kind of artistic immortality that money cannot buy, who influenced the course of popular music in ways that will echo far beyond his lifetime, who touched millions of lives through his art, all while living modestly, privately, authentically. When the news of D'Angelo's death was announced on Tuesday, October 14, 2025, the outpouring of grief and appreciation from fans and fellow musicians around the world demonstrated the true wealth he had accumulated. Not in dollars, but in the love and respect of a global community, united by their appreciation for his artistry. That love, that respect, that influence, these are the treasures that matter, the riches that endure. Rest in peace, D'Angelo. The groove goes on forever. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.